Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of 5 Facts. I'm Tony Southcott, and today we're going to be talking about the 2017 blockbuster hit Get Out. This is a film by Jordan Peele, who is coming off of his highly rated comedy sketch show on Comedy Central, and this is actually his directorial debut. Performances by Daniel Kaluuya, Allison Williams, and one of my favorite actors, Stephen Root, set this movie apart. I don't want to get too much into plot details right now, I just want to get to the facts, so let's get this thing rolling. Fact number 1. There's a very clear Lovecraft connection. There are many homages to H.P. Lovecraft's work in Get Out. In his story, The Dunwich Horror, the antagonist's last name is Armitage, as it is in the film for the antagonists. In many of the Lovecraft stories, you have decadent families, secret societies, cults, and other supernatural elements. Lovecraft also has played with the idea of transmigration of souls to other hosts and the ideas of altered reality. States of hypnosis have also been used in various stories. Some have asserted this connection also reaches to Lovecraft because of the notable racism he held towards black people. I'm not 100% sure that was kind of the point of the Lovecraft connection, but it's something that a lot of people on forums and various other things talked about whenever I was researching this film. Fact number 2. The hitting of the deer holds deeper meaning to the film. Recently, I've seen a lot of deer struck by cars for cheap scares, just a way to kind of change up the pacing of a movie, and it's definitely a cheap shot a lot of times, but not in Get Out. In Get Out, there's a deeper connection when Chris hits the deer because of how his mother was killed. Like, she was killed by a car and basically left on the side of the road, and that's part of the reason why he's getting out to try and finish off the deer. It's also symbolizing him kind of being led into this trap. Another thing about this scene is it's the first time you really get to see who Rose really is. Whenever she's in this scene, she's concerned for Chris, but not at all for the deer. And it just shows a certain callousness for what's happening there because she cares more about getting him to that trap than anything else. There's also a deeper connection here because Dean, the father of the Armitage family, talks about how much he hates deer. And essentially that ends up being part of his undoing at the end whenever he gets stabbed with a full-on taxidermied stag. It's a weird connection that kind of runs throughout the movie, but it is something that's there, especially because black buck used to actually be a racial term for a young black man. Fact number 3. Some thoughts on the sunken place. The sunken place is a state that Chris goes to when he is under hypnosis, as well as a place where his soul would reside after the coagular procedure. While it is a figurative place in the storyline, it is a metaphor about living as a minority in America. It can be seen as a sort of paralysis people of color feel whenever there's so much oppressive forces around them. Jordan Peele said, "The sunken place means we're marginalized. No matter how hard we scream, the system silences us." Other people have said that this is partially... There's a lot of people who have also said that the fact that he's made to close his eyes, that he's made to do all these other things also represents the educational system, but it's a little bit harder for me to make those connections entirely. Fact number 4. This movie is crammed stuffed with symbolism. Jordan Peele did a fantastic job for a first-time director on making sure that all the symbolism was on point here. It's something that's hard to do effectively in cinema without slapping people upside the head with it. To start, Missy uses a literal silver spoon to control her victims. The silver spoons have always been associated with wealth, with privilege, and things of that nature. During the bingo silent auction, this is reminiscent of actually 2 different things. First off, it feels like a slave auction. You've got a bunch of white people lined up. They're all with their cards. There's a giant picture of Chris in the background. And they're basically deciding who gets to own him. Like, in a very, very literal sense, who gets to own his body. It's also reminiscent of a funeral because of the way people are lined up. Once again, the big picture there that feels like a funeral. And everybody kind of in black and just hanging out in those perfect rows. During Chris's escape, he's basically forced to pick cotton, which is a pretty easy illusion to pick up. Like, that used to be the main reason why there were slaves in the South at the time. It was all agricultural, but cotton picking was a big part of it. In this, it kind of subverts that symbolism because he actually pulls the cotton out to fill his ears so he can't be hypnotized anymore. It's a way of subverting that. Stephen Root's character is basically a representation of appropriation. You're talking about a blind art dealer who is literally trying to attain this body and his eyes so that he can create this art, commercialize it, and sell it. It's basically saying a guy that has no talent in art, even though this guy is very wealthy from doing art distribution, is taking over somebody, appropriating their talents, using it for commercial use. There are a whole lot more beyond this, and just for the sake of brevity in this video, I think we're going to move on to fact number 5. Fact number 5, the alternate ending was much more bleak. When I saw this movie in theaters, a cop car pulls up at the end, and you see the flashing lights, and immediately your thought is, this is going to be the cop from the beginning. He's going to get out, and he's going to think that Chris did all of this, that this is all his fault. He's going to get arrested, and he's basically going to get charged with killing this white family, and it's going to be the stereotype. Or he's just going to get shot. This was the original intended ending. Being that Peele wrote this film during the Obama administration in what people had called a post-racial world, he wanted to show that we weren't quite there yet. As the political climate grew more heated and the Black Lives Matter protests started to mount, he decided that the people that were going to see this movie needed a hero. They needed some sort of release ending, and decided to relent and have it be that his friend came to pick him up. By the way, his friend is one of the best parts of this movie, like the perfect level of levity and comedy added to this film. It really shows Peele's roots with his comedy sketches, just to have that guy in there. And whenever you have a really tense movie, having those moments truly helps it out. But I know that as soon as I saw those flashing lights, I completely assumed the worst. I really hoped it wasn't going to be that, and it turned out that it wasn't this time. The thing about horror is there's a lot of times where they're just going to completely break your heart, because that's what horror is. Like, you can't always have a happy ending whenever it's horror. You can't have everything wrapped up neatly and expect people to still be afraid. You get a conclusion, but it's not always the conclusion that you... Get Out is an important movie for so many reasons. It's a more subtle and nuanced version of racial America, and exposes a sort of smug liberal type of racism that isn't quite as talked about. It covers the struggles of a young man trying to make his way in an oppressive system, and does it without feeling overly preachy. I might harp on this too much, but for Jordan Peele to bust this out for his first full-length feature movie is quite a feat. One would suspect in times where there is so much racial tension that a movie like this would incite a lot of negative reaction from certain parts of the population, but this movie has a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. The one critic that gave it a bad review on that site is kind of notorious for doing this. Like, he was the only one that gave Toy Story a negative review. So he's kind of a contrarian and is very, very picky about this. Sometimes it feels like he's just trying to break those streaks. Not to mention, it knocked it out of the park in the box office. You're talking about a $4.5 million budget bringing in about $250 million. I can't even imagine what it's done on DVD and Blu-ray either. This movie has so many influences in classic horror, the two main ones being The Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby. Both are about people being taken over, about their bodies being co-opted, about things happening against their will, as well as sort of a cult-like attitude. With The Stepford Wives, you basically have people being turned into robots. In this, they're not being so much turned into robots as they are slaves to their masters. This has been one of my favorite films of 2017. It's filled with tension and drama and a lot of really good scares, and it really has this sort of feel you rarely get from a movie, where you feel on edge the whole time. It's a hard thing to capture whenever you've got people for 90 minutes and you're expecting to be able to just build something for them, and this movie absolutely nailed it. There's a few parts that feel like it's absurd, like the idea of a soul grafting sort of procedure, but sometimes the absurdity makes the premise a little bit easier to swallow just because it's such a big jump. It's like The Stepford Wives. Like, they didn't have robots or plastic surgeons that good back then, but you just kind of buy into it and roll with what's happening in the story world. This is truly must-see, and I think that whenever Oscar season rolls around, despite this having a winter/spring release, you're actually going to get some nominations and possibly some wins. Always good to see horror making it into those categories, because traditionally it has to be a very good, very, very good horror movie to even get an Oscar nomination. It's a category that doesn't get a whole lot of love by the Academy. Thank you all for watching today. I'd love to hear your opinion on this movie. Maybe have you drop a few ideas on what you think the different symbols were, some things that I might have missed here. I love hearing that sort of stuff. So if you have any ideas about this movie or anything you want to share, please hit up the comments. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button, do so please. If you really like these, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/humanechoes. I hope you guys have an excellent week. We'll see you in 2 weeks with more 5 facts and a whole bunch of videos on this channel before then. Bye, everybody.